Hello, and welcome to the Esri GeoDev webinar series. This webinar is a continuation of the series we created in the hopes of engaging in developer-related topics and discussions in between dev summits. We have our next developer summit coming up in Berlin, November 6th through 8th. We have a lot of new topics, advanced features, and additional functionality to share with you over the next coming months. So be sure to stay connected with us through our GeoDev webinar series page on go.esri.com/geodev or any of our social media accounts at EsriGeodev. We would love to have conversations like these taking place throughout the year so that when we do meet at one of these Dev Summit conferences, it will be as though we never stopped. We hope you get as much or more out of this webinar than you anticipated. Now, we would like to introduce you to today's webinar, Using Webhooks in ArcGIS Enterprise. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Use Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Joel Jayaraja, Product Engineer on ArcGIS Enterprise, and Nalika Amarasinghe, Software Engineer on ArcGIS Enterprise. Joel, let's get started, shall we?
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. Excited, Nalika and I are both excited to be here. So as Amy mentioned, we'll be talking about webhooks in ArcGIS Enterprise. This is a new capability that we added in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7. And so if you've never heard of webhooks or you're already familiar with it, hopefully at the end of this, you walk away with some inspiration on how you can start implementing them in your own organization. So just looking at the agenda for today, we'll talk about what a webhook is, what are the advantages of implementing them. There are some new key terms that if you're familiar with webhooks, you've probably heard already, but if not, we'll introduce those to you. And then we'll look at a demo. And so we're gonna dive into some lower level technologies like Java, JavaScript, Python to put this end-to-end workflow together. And so that will be a great demo for some of the technical folks out there. And then we'll talk about some additional use cases, administration tips, what's next on our roadmap, and we'll take questions at the end. So first of all, to conceptualize what a webhook is, let's say I drop my car off at the mechanic and I need to know when the car is ready to be picked up. I can either keep calling my mechanic and asking them, hey, is my car ready to be picked up? But that's an inefficient use of my time and their time. Instead, the mechanic can say, you know what, Joel, when your car is ready to be picked up, I'll call you. And that's what a webhook is. It's the idea that you don't need to keep calling a system, asking it for information. Instead, the system will let you know when it has that information or data ready. And so in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7, we introduced this capability so that you could automatically provide some of your other applications or workflows with event-driven information, and that information is delivered as an HTTPS request. And so you can use webhooks to create automated and integrative workflows, and this is adding new extensibility to ArcGIS Enterprise. And so going through this diagram, on the left, we have users working in Portal for ArcGIS, and so they're adding items, they're creating groups, they're sharing items to groups, and let's say we want to subscribe to one of these events. And so let's say we want to subscribe to all items in the portal. And so what you'll do is you'll subscribe to that event, you'll create your webhook receiver, which we have on the right side. And so anytime a user does something related to items in your portal, that will trigger the webhook and it will send a payload to your webhook receiver. And from there, you can use that information for post-processing. You might use it for operational intelligence, or you might use it to integrate with some of the other systems or workflows in your businesses or teams. And so what are the advantages of using webhooks? So going back to that first story about the mechanic, and don't worry, my car is fine, but it's more efficient than polling. So you don't need to keep pinging a server, asking it for data. Instead, the server will let you know when it has that data for you. And so this allows you to build event-driven workflows, and this creates new and more efficient opportunities for automation. And so some key terms. So I've already kind of talked about this, but the trigger event. So this is the operation that's going to trigger our webhook. And you can configure your webhook. So for example, you can configure your webhook to be triggered when a specific item is updated in your organization or when an item is shared. And your webhooks can have more than one trigger event. And so looking at this table for the trigger events for portal items, you can see it follows this URI pattern. And so at the top, we have high level / items. That's going to give me all of the events for all items in my portal. Or I can narrow it down from there. I can use the item ID to specify one item in my portal that I'm interested, or I can even specify an operation on a specific item that I'm interested in. So let's say you have a secured item in your portal that you really want to watch its access to. You can just subscribe to that one item and create webhooks, or have your webhook triggered anytime that item's sharing is updated. And then we also have events for users and groups. And so this follows a very similar pattern. You can listen to events for all of the users in your organization, or you can narrow it down to specific users. One thing to note, you'll see we have this update event for both users, groups, and items. And these are really updates to those, like the item's properties or the group's properties, or the user's profile. And so some of you might be asking, can I create a webhook so I'm notified when a user's licensing is changed or when their role is changed? And this is really pertaining to that user's profile and not their licensing. So the answer is no for that, but maybe one day. And as I mentioned, you can really you can create a webhook to subscribe to more than one event just by comma separating them, and we'll see that in the demos shortly. And so then we have the payload. So once your webhook is triggered, a payload is delivered to the specified payload URL in JSON format, and each event follows a similar JSON schema with information that is relevant to that event. So at the top here, we have this high-level information about the webhook, where it was delivered from, what's the timestamp for when it was delivered, and then information about the events. So here I can see that an item, which is indicated by this source, was shared by this user to everyone and to a specific group, and that's indicated by the group ID. And so these payloads are intended to be lightweight. If there's more information you require, you can simply call back into Portal. We give you just enough information for you to act on this event. And then finally, we have the payload URL. So this is the URL that you must provide when creating a webhook, and this defines where that payload will be delivered. And so again, since all payloads are delivered through HTTPS, the webhook receiver must be configured to communicate over HTTPS. So this means ensuring you have the appropriate certificates installed, and it must be reachable by the portal. And so there are a number of options for how and where a webhook is received. You can build your own Java servlet, which we'll see in the demo. You can use third-party services such as Microsoft Flow, Zapier, IFTTT, Integromat. And so if you've used webhooks in Survey 123 already, you might be familiar with some of these services already. Or you can build your own custom web server using something like Node.js or Python Flask. If you were at our Dev Summit, you might have seen the plenary where they use AWS Lambda and API Gateway to to receive their payloads as well. Okay, so now Nalika is going to show us what we can do with this. Over to you, Nalika.
Hey, thanks, Joel. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. So this is our public GitHub repo, and we have included a lot of information here. We'll go through as much as possible today. So in today's demo, we're going to show you how to set up an end-to-end workflow using Webhooks in ArcGIS Enterprise, the Python API, Slack, and Node.js. We have listed all the details here. Let's say our organization wants to make sure that any item shared to the public meets certain standards. For example, whether the item has enough tags, description, and meets completeness score. If it does not, alert admin and allow them to react. Let's walk through the workflow quickly. Our user shares an item to the public and webhook is triggered and the payload is sent out. The receiver application receives the payload and writes to a file on the disk. Using a Python API for ArcGIS, we'll do a callback to the portal, check item properties, and see whether this item meets our requirement. If not, we are going to inform the admins via Slack channel, right? So the end goal of this demo is to alert the admins via Slack channel whenever an item is shared that doesn't meet the standards, right? For example, in this case, our admin assistant here tells us that item was shared to the public but doesn't meet our requirements and tells us what was missing. It's missing tags, description is not long enough, and the score completeness is below, right? And within the Slack, you can add missing tags or message the admin saying you need to address these issues. Let's take a look at the steps you will have to follow in order to deploy this end-to-end solution. In the step 1, you will need to install ArcGIS Enterprise and configure it. Since Webhook was introduced as part of the ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7, you will at least need 10.7 or later version. In the step 2, we'll show you how to clone this repository and with all the samples. And in the step 3, we'll show you how to configure the webhook receiver so that it can listen to incoming webhook payload, right? In our example, we are going to use the Java receiver and we'll go into the details in a second. Once you have configured the webhook receiver, you can use it to configure your webhook on your portal, right? In the step 4, Joel show you how to use the Python script, and also in the step 5 he'll show you how to configure the the Slack with Node.js. When you're using the Python, there's a few required packages. We have listed everything here, and also about the Slack bot and Node.js installation, right? So let's take a look at all the receivers, sample receivers we have listed here. So these are the receivers that you can use it right away to spin up a webhook receiver. First one is a Java receiver, which we'll go into the details in a second. The second and third are custom web servers that Joel mentioned, written in Node.js and Flask. For example, the Node.js sample is written in JavaScript and it's very simple, and we have listed out all the details here with the animations. And I'll show you the code quickly. So this is first you need to require to configure the certificate, and then Once the payload is received, it converts to Java, JSON, and write to a file on the disk. So it's a simple JavaScript application. This is probably the easiest one to deploy as a receiver, right? Let's go back to our Java receiver and go into the details, right? So there are 4 steps you will need to follow in order to deploy this. In the step 1 and 2, you're going to install the Java SDK and a build tool like Maven. Once you install Java and build tool, you will need to configure some environment variables like Java home and Maven home. In the step 2, you will need a servlet container like Apache Tomcat. Right. So using Apache Tomcat, you will need the version 7 or later, and make sure you enable the SSL because webhooks only can communicate on HTTPS traffic, right? In the step 3, I'll show you how to clone, compile, and deploy this servlet. And at the last step, we'll configure the webhook receiver with this newly created receiver's URL, right? So I have already done the step 1 and 2 and also open up the port 8443 on Tomcat for the HTTPS traffic. Let's quickly go to a command prompt and check if everything is running and good, right? I'm checking Maven version here, sorry. Right, so we have Maven 3.6.1, also Java 11. So this is the OpenJDK version, but you can use Java 8 or later. Right?
Hi, Nalika. This is Amy. Can you zoom in
Yes.
a little bit on the code, please?
Yeah, I have this. Sorry. Does it look good or?
That's better. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, we have Java and install the build tool. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clone this repository into our C drive. Okay. Now it's cloning the. All right. It says clone. Let's take a look at cloned source code. Going to the Java receiver, and inside Java we have this source code. Right. So this is a simple servlet which is listening to the post request. Right?
Nalika, are you able to make this page bigger?
Yeah. Is it good now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem. All right. So yeah, we have the servlet listening on the post request, and once the payload is received, it converts to JSON format and write to a file on the disk. The file path is hard coded here. Of course, this is the bare minimum servlet, and you can add functionalities and customize this as you wish. We just wanted to show you the bare minimum one to start with, right? So let's do a compilation of this and deploy this, right? So I'm changing to the directory and doing a Maven clean install, which will build this source file. And next thing I'm going to do is copy this class file, which is under classes, target classes, to the Tomcat, right? As you know, you have to go to the web apps root web.inf classes, copy it here, right? Next thing is editing the web XML with the servlet mappings, okay? I'm going to copy this servlet mapping and the class names, right? Save it and go back to the command prompt and start the Tomcat, right? So this should deploy our receiver, and let's check the port 8443. Okay, so if you get this message, that means that our receiver is up and running and it's ready to listen to incoming payloads. Right? I'm going to use this URL as our payload URL and navigate to portal directory. Right? Make sure you log in as admin because only admins can configure the webhooks. Right? Once you logged in, click on ArcGIS link, scroll all the way down and click on webhooks. Right? And then click on create webhooks link. This is the form you will need to fill out in order to create a webhook, right? Name, payload URL, configuration properties, and events are mandatory, and the secret is optional. You can include the secret so that we will include that with your payload, and you can use that secret text to verify the sender on the receiver send, right? I'm going to use that payload URL here. I'm going to listen to any item changes, right? Once I click on the create webhook button, behind the scene, portal will ping this URL to make sure that this is a reachable URL. Otherwise, you won't be able to create the webhook, right? So it was successfully created and it has returned back unique ID of the webhook as well as some information. Okay, all right.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I keep forgetting. So yeah, I'll repeat that again. So you will get the unique ID of the webhook and as well as the other information about the newly created webhook. So let's navigate back and refresh this page so you can see the newly created webhook listed here, right? So next thing I'll do is quickly test our receiver so to make sure that our receiver is working as expected. I'm going to navigate to the portal directory or the home app and do a simple update to a existing item and save it. This should have triggered that webhook and payload should have been sent to our receiver and receiver should have written to that file. I'm going to navigate to that ctemp and check the file, right? So this is the webhook payload that just received and it has written to this file. As Joel mentioned, this is a lightweight payload. If you need more information, you need to call back to the portal with some of this information like portal URL and retrieve the information you will need. Okay. So with that, since we have the receiver, I'm going to hand over back to the Joel to walk us through the Python script and the Slack configuration.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have our webhook receiver configured. Nalika showed us how to deploy a Java servlet for this first half of the workflow, but as you mentioned, there are other examples in this repository that you can use to accomplish this as well. You can use the Node.js. I'm not familiar with Java, so a lot of what Nalika was going through was not familiar to me, but if you're more comfortable with JavaScript, then you can just deploy it using Node.js and it will write to the text file all the same. But next, we will look at the second component of this demo, which is using the Python API. And so what we're going to do is we have a few scripts in this repository. I'll walk through them in a second, but they're essentially going to parse through this text file, look at the attributes and values that are there, and then take the appropriate actions. And Nalika showed us what our end goal is, which is to notify our managers via Slack. And so we'll show you how you can do that. And so in this repository, we have a few Python scripts. The first one I'll talk about is this file listener script. And so we used a library called Watchdog. Essentially, it watches a directory, and if a file changes within that directory, then you can call another function. So you'll be able to just deploy this. So here we have our directory where that text file is located, and so anytime this text file is written to, it's going to call our main script and a function within that. And so yeah, this is a pretty simple script. You'll have to install that Watchdog library, but I've listed all the requirements, any libraries that you'll need to install here. So you can use a Python package manager like pip to install these libraries. The next is our main Python script, and hopefully you can see this. Let me zoom in maybe. And so this is a great kind of springboard to get you started with using webhooks and parsing through the text file. And if you've never used the ArcGIS API for Python, it will also be a great introduction. But it's really to help get you started in writing your own production-ready code. So essentially, we begin by reading that text file, of course, and then we, if there are multiple events, we'll extract out those events. And then we start parsing through it. And so in the beginning, I'm taking some high-level information, such as the portal URL, and then I'm using that later on to connect into that portal. And so there's a config file, and I'll show you that in a second, where you can set your username and password. And so once we have our events, again, what we're interested in knowing is whether an item has been shared to everyone. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for what the operation is. And if it is a share event, then was it shared to everyone? And then if so, then continue through this logic. And so here for this prototype, we're looking at tags, which Nalika mentioned. And so once we know that the item was shared to everyone, we have that information, such as what is the item ID, what's the portal URL, and so we use that to call back into portal, which is up there, right? And so then we check the item's properties. And so we're going to check to see whether it has all of the tags that I'm expecting it to have in order for it to be shared publicly. And you can obviously customize and configure this to meet your own standards. We also looked at the description. We're saying if it's less than 30 characters, then it's probably a incomplete description, and we look at the score completeness. And so if this item wasn't ready to be shared publicly, then that's when you see that initial message in Slack. And so we use the Slack API for Python. Again, that's one of the libraries you'll have to install. And we've also included we just followed tutorials and examples online to create this, and we've included all of those examples that we followed. So they're there for you if you're interested. But essentially, if the item is not ready to be shared publicly, we'll get this message in Slack. You'll have to create a Slack application, and that message will include all of this information, such as what was the item ID, what's the URL the item is coming from, and that's it. And so if I go back, this is the config file I mentioned, and we've just externalized some of those values. So you can just update this file. There shouldn't be anything you need to update in the admin assistant script, but again, if you want to change the tags around, well, of course, you're not going to want to use the same tags that we used. And then the second part of this is this Slack bot JavaScript file. And so thinking back to that demo, you saw that once we receive that message, the administrator can add the tags within Slack. And so for that, we used a package called BotKit, and it allows you to create a WebSocket that's listening for messages within a Slack channel. And so when you get that message, you can then train it on how to respond. So you saw that it responds adding tags. You can change this. You can give this more skills if you want to, but really this was just an addition to our workflow just to make it cooler. But of course you can just do everything within Python instead. And so let's just look at what we have on disk. And so here is the Webhooks sample repository that Nalika cloned. Again, all of these scripts are here under the sample workflow folder. So I've already deployed everything on this environment, but I'll just take this admin assistant script and bring it to my workspace. Oh, it's already there. Okay, great. And so this file listener script, because it's waiting for changes to the text file, of course, you should probably have it running in the background at all times or whenever you're expecting that text file to be written to. Because Nalika was doing his demo, I didn't have it running. So we'll start that. I also need to start my bot kit. And so let's see, I'm just gonna start that up as well. And if you've never used Node, it's a great way to spin up lightweight web apps. Okay, so we'll just start this Slack bot. Okay, so that application is starting. Again, you can see a WebSocket has been opened. So now it's listening to our Slack channel. Okay, so let's look at our item. Here's our item in Portal. As you can see, its description is pretty incomplete. In terms of tags, it only has one, so that's definitely not correct. And the score completeness is low. So this item is definitely not ready to be public, but we know that users in your organization might do it, might share it publicly anyways. And so let's say that they do. So what we expect to happen is, as Nalika showed us, the webhook will send this payload and it will be written to the text file. And once that text file is written to, our file listener script should catch that update. And so we see we got a message in Slack, and we have our little Slack application or Slack bot that we created, and it's telling us that, hey, this item is not ready to be shared publicly. You know, it's missing the following properties. And so you can configure that, you can rewrite that Python script so that if the item wasn't ready to be shared publicly, maybe unshared, or maybe add these properties back in, so you're more responsive instead of waiting for a user to do something. But the second part of this is being able to add those tags back in within Slack. And so I tag the Slack bot and I say add tags, and I'll add those tags I see it's missing. The other one is Esri. And so if I just switch back to the machine, you know, this JavaScript application, you can see it got those messages, and it's gonna write this to another text file on disk that we're also looking at. And maybe I'll just show you that, because that confused me, so it might have confused you. And so on temp, you see we have this second text file response. And so when I added tags, that application wrote that to this file as well. And then that file listener script is also watching that. And if that file gets edited, we call a different function within our script. And so again, we're missing tags. If I refresh this item page, I should see the tags updated. And yeah, there they are. Pretty cool. Okay, so that's the workflow. again, this is really just to get you started and hopefully give you some ideas of some workflows you can build in your organization. But there are other use cases. You might be interested in using webhooks for additional logging. So you can write all those payloads to a text file or maybe a database. And if your enterprise ever goes down, at least you have this additional source of logs that you can look at. You can also configure webhooks for notifications via email. This is a really popular request, and we'll look at how you can quickly do this in a moment. You might also be interested in some group-based workflows. So maybe I want to trigger a webhook when an item has been shared to a specific group, or if an unauthorized user has been added to a secured group. And then really, there's a million use cases out there. It's wherever your imagination takes you. But let's look at how we can use webhooks to send out an email anytime a certain event is triggered. So I'm going to use Zapier to do this. So Zapier is one of those online services that allow you to create webhooks. They're really fun and easy to use. It's kind of this drag and drop experience. There's no coding required really. And so the first step is to set up my trigger. And so in this case, the trigger is going to be when a payload is received here. And so you see they have this webhooks application. And so I'll click that. And I'm going to say catch hook. So wait for a new post to this Zapier URL. And right away, it's going to give me my payload URL. So, imagine that you don't have to run through that whole Java workflow to get your payload URL. You have it right there. So I'll just go back to ArcGIS portal directory. And create my webhook. And you can have more than one webhook in your organization. So this one is going to be our Zapier webhook. And I'm going to paste that payload URL. And for events, so at 10.7.1, we added a new event, which was the ability to be notified when a user signs into the organization. This was requested by some of our customers. And so let's say I want to subscribe to that event. So maybe I'm only interested in knowing when this admin user signs in. And so I'll create that webhook. Okay, and so the next step of creating this workflow in Zapier is that you need to provide it a sample payload so that it knows what to expect. And that way you can, continue building your workflow based on the payload you're expecting to see. And so I need to send it a sample, and because our webhook will be triggered when I sign in, let's sign in. Okay, so that should have sent in payload. That's our registration. Let's go get more samples. Okay, so there it is. There's our payload. As you can see, as an admin, I signed into the portal. It gives me the timestamp where I signed in. We also have the user ID and username. So great. So I'm going to use this to continue building my workflow. And the next I need to add an action. And so one of the great things about using a tool like Zapier or Microsoft Flow is that they come built in with tons of applications. There's a lot in here. I'll let you explore that. If I wanted to further format that payload, there's tools in here to do that. But in this case, I'm just interested in sending an email when this payload is triggered. And so I'm going to send an outbound email. And I'm going to send it, let's say, to myself. I might regret putting my email here. And then let's say the subject, I'll say a user has signed in. And then the body, the webhook was triggered because the following user signed in. Because I've sent a sample payload, I can pull in a dynamic body here. And so I'm going to add my events, let's say. And so that will tell me that which user signed in and when they signed in. So I'll say continue, and I can send a test email by Zapier. And so this will take a couple of seconds probably. But yeah, if you've never used one of these services, Zapier is really great. Microsoft Flow, if you're already an Office 365 customer, that should be available to you. And then you can tie into all of your Microsoft applications. Okay, great. So we got our email. That was pretty quick. And so it says the webhook was triggered because the following user was signed in, and it tells me what user signed it. And so that's a really quick way of deploying a webhook workflow using a service such as Zapier. Okay, so Nalika, back over to you to talk about some administration tips.
Great, thanks, Joel. So we have listed some administration tips for you when you are working with webhooks. First one is the avoid redundancy. For example, if you already have a webhook with higher level event like /items, you probably don't need another webhook subscribed to the specific item ID delivered to the same URL because you will receive redundant payloads. On the security aspect, since webhook supports only HTTPS traffic, make sure your receiver can communicate with portal and has valid certificate. Optionally, you can include the secret text that I mentioned when registering your webhook so that it will be added to your payload and can be used for authentication on receiving end. To minimize the exposure of sensitive information, we keep a lightweight payload. If you need more details, you will need to call back with your credentials. When troubleshooting, portal logs is a great place to look into, and the debug level will provide more information. And if for some reason you want to pause your webhook, you can do that by deactivating. You can activate it later. In addition, you can check notification status link, will show you in a bit, and which provides the information about the previous notifications. And you can even use a forward proxy like Fiddler to check the posted payload from portal. We have exposed a number of advanced settings to fine-tune your webhook delivery. For example, the number of delivery attempts, notification timeout, and elapsed time, you can configure those, right? Let's quickly take a look at some of these advanced settings. So here's the settings. If you go to the webhooks link, there is a settings link, and you can play around with these settings and update if you want. And if you click on one of the webhooks, there is a notification status link, which will provide the information about the the previous statuses, right? You can even get more information by clicking the JSON link. It will give all the information about the what was the payload it has delivered earlier, and the timestamps, everything, right? Let's go back to our slide. So what's next for the webhooks? We are continuing to add item, user, and group events. For example, Joel mentioned about the user licensing changes. Probably that's one of them in our list. And please let us know if you would like us to add specific events that are not currently implemented. Popular ask is support for feature layer editing events. This is in our wish list too. We are also planning to integrate webhook services such as Zapier or Microsoft Flow to the portal, right? We plan to add UI and UX within portal so that users can manage and visualize webhooks much easier. Please note that we don't have a defined timelines for these enhancements yet. So we have listed some resources so that you can go through to familiarize more with webhooks. So the first one is the GeoDev webinar you are already familiar with. the GitHub repository we just went through, and the ArcGIS Enterprise overview, and the documentation, especially the REST documentation, and our blogs. We'll take a look at a few of these. Right. So this is our REST API documentation. This listed all our APIs and with the sample usage and examples. This is a great place to start with when you're using the webbook API. And I highly encourage you to go through this the blog that Joel has written. He has mentioned what's a webbook, why we, what are the use cases, and also he has a way of explaining it with nice little animations here. So definitely take a look at this and have fun. I think that's all we have for you. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Nalika. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. We've received quite a few, and we will try to get through as many as possible, but whatever we do not get to today, we will address in a GeoNet blog post after the webinar. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question, and just to say, we had a lot of frequently asked questions, some of which you covered to some degree, but just to be sure, let's summarize some of these again, okay? So the number one question we received was, can webhooks be used with both ArcGIS Enterprise Portal as well as with your ArcGIS online organization?
Yeah, so right now it's only available in Portal for ArcGIS. I think we recognize that there is a requirement to support it in ArcGIS Online, and it's in the backlog, but there's no firm timeline on that. But right now, just ArcGIS, a Portal for ArcGIS.
Okay, great. Can you create a trigger that informs you whenever a feature layer has been edited? For example, perhaps an email or text message sent whenever features are added or deleted?
Right now, unfortunately, you cannot do that. But this is in our wish list, and a lot of people have asked for this feature, and we are definitely going to work on this and work with our features layer team in order to support this.
All right, great. Can we update an existing web scene layer with the new webhook that can respond to real-time information?
No, with the current information, the availability, I don't think you can do that. But this is something that we can add to our list of the enhancements.
Yeah, it would be good to get those requirements laid out so we can understand the use case and what the expectations are, and we can add it to our backlog. Maybe through GeoNet or maybe through the survey, they can add those details.
Okay. Can wildcards be used in order to set up a webhook that responds to more than one item or action, or perhaps setting a webhook on a portal or online group so that it responds to items within the group?
No, not yet. But yeah, we have think about this, and definitely this is something that we will look into in future releases.
All right. While Microsoft Flow webhooks they've been available for ArcGIS Online, they have not been available for Portal. When will Microsoft Flow be compatible with Portal 2?
So I guess maybe they're asking about the connectors in Microsoft Flow. Yeah, we want to work on that, just building, being better integrated with some of those services. So it's also on our roadmap to look at.
Okay, great. What terminal app tool was Nalika using?
The command prompt, I believe it's a Connemo. It's a free command prompt similar to the Windows command prompt, but you can download. It has more capabilities. You can create tabs and configure those. It's called Connemo.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Nalika. Is all the code you're showing going to be made available? Is it all in the GitHub repos that you showed?
Yes, everything is available. Hopefully, we have included the details in the README file that details out each and every step. But please let us know if we have missed anything. Can update it. But yes, everything is included.
Okay, great. Nalika, you mentioned there were 4 steps to setting up a webhook. Are there alternatives to step 3?
The step 3. Let me quickly go back to that. I think. So I think they are talking about who have asked about this step. So this is the cloning the webhook from the repository, and as I mentioned, you can use either Java or any other samples that we have listed. Alternatively, you can even use the third-party tools like Zapier or Microsoft Flow that Joel mentioned. And yeah, those are the alternatives instead of using this custom receivers.
Okay. As for the class file you're using, is that using some default file or are you creating that separately?
Class file is created when you compile. So once I got the repository, cloned the repository, then I issued this command maven clean install, which will compile and create that class file out of the source file. So you just have to configure install the Java and then the build tool like Maven, and then clone the repository and change to this directory. This example I have cloned to the C directory. That's why you can see the webbook samples under C. But wherever you cloned it, you change to that directory and issue the maven clean install command. Then you will see that class file under target folder. So if I go back to the receiver, under target, this target under classes, there's a folder called classes. Create the class file. So this is the class file that I used to deploy on the Tomcat. So it has to be generated through the compile command. You can use the Java compile command too. In this case, I have used the build tool, which is much easier, but you can use the Java C command too.
All right. Is there a way to set up an email notification trigger without using a third party like MS Flow or Zapier? For example, our own scripting with Django, Flask, Python, or curl requests?
So it sounds like they're asking whether maybe from Portal itself, if you can send out an email without having to use a third-party service.
I believe so.
I think, yeah, you should be able to use those the scripts that the user mentioned. But yeah, honestly, I'm not that familiar with those. But I think they should be able to use those.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to the workflow we showed, once you receive that payload, you can just fire off your script to send out that email.
Correct. Yes. So yeah, it's up to the user. You can use any script, I think.
Okay. Will webhooks be able to be used to report when users are added, removed, or have capabilities changed, such as level 1 to level 2, or added to a group?
So for users added or removed, yes, those events are supported, but for capabilities and roles, not yet. That's something we want to look at more because obviously that would be pretty valuable to know when user is downgraded from level 2 to level 1. So yeah, it's on our roadmap. But yeah, if a user is added to the portal or user is removed from the portal, you can subscribe to those events.
Can we use webhooks with ArcGIS deployed on AWS?
Yeah, you should be able to use it.
How can we use webhooks with Survey 123, either for new surveys or for ones already in use?
So the webhooks implementation for Survey 123 is different from this one. So I don't really understand the question, but yeah, they should be able to create a webhook with Survey 123. It's that hasn't changed. This is a separate implementation, and you can't subscribe to those same events that you can within Survey 123's webhook implementation.
All right. Can a webhook check to see if specific metadata for a feature layer has been filled out?
No, as I mentioned, your TED, but we are hoping to add these capabilities for feature layer editing in your future releases. But yeah, those are not at timeline yet, but that's definitely in our list of things to be implemented.
Yeah, just to add to that, for the metadata, like I believe there's a endpoint on the feature service level that you can call to check the metadata. It just depends on what event you want to trigger that. So, I mean, I guess maybe if you, one of the events you can look at is when a service is published in Portal. And so once that event happens, you can call into the feature service and look at the metadata. But that would be a total custom script to look at the REST API and examine that.
All right. And which version of Portal does the webhooks capability shown today exist? Is there a plan to move it to older versions of the portal, or does it already exist in all versions of Portal today?
The webbook was introduced in 10.7, and it will be available after 10.7. I mean 10.7 and after releases, but we are not planning to add into the older versions.
Okay, and for our final question, can a webhook be used to report when a user opens a custom application?
Not right now. So I guess anytime an application is open, trigger the webhook. Yeah, not right now. That's interesting though. That would be cool. You could use something like, yeah, I'm not sure how you would do that. I don't know if you can do it with Google Analytics. If you put a tracking ID on it.
All right. Well, thank you, Nalika and Joel, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar using webhooks in ArcGIS Enterprise. If your question did not get answered, just rest assured that we will be addressing all of the questions in a blog post on GeoNet that we'll be posting along with the recording of this webinar. You can find it both on GeoNet and on the go.esri.com/geodev page in 7 to 10 business days. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me using my email address in your follow-up email. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. We will be, like I said, providing that recording of this presentation, which will be available in 7 to 10 business days on the go.esri.com/geodev page. And on behalf of Esri and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.